Hello, football family. Welcome back into Huddle It Up Films. Here with at Real Jake Vogel. Always put the in there, but it's just at Real Jake Vogel. We're here to talk about fantasy football, wide receivers. Quick note at the beginning: this is for a half point PPR league. So if you're looking at the slot receivers or the receivers that are getting a lot of targets, go ahead and bump them up. The receivers to get a lot of receptions. And if you're in a standard league and you focus on them touchdowns, you adjust your list accordingly. So we're not going to waste much time here on an intro, Jake. I did want to ask you how you're doing though today. How's it going, Jake?
I'm doing great, Jason.
Man,
How are you doing?
man, just awesome. A little bit confused though, Jake, because I tell you what, the more I dig into this list, I feel like the less I know. And we're gonna kick it right off with your list. We're gonna put that up on the screen. Now I don't see. We're gonna put 1 through 18 on the screen right here, as you can see. And most of it is clear cut. I think the top three in this list, when you talk about Devonte Adams, Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, I mean, you guys can make your own opinion out there, who you rank them, where you rank them, pretty predictable. So I want to talk about a few of the unknowns. And Jake, I'm going to start with number 7 on your list, Justin Jefferson, heading into his second year, blew it up on the scene in his rookie year. Tremendous route runner, great size. And when I saw his speed at the combine, this was a guy I was completely sold on. What do you expect from Justin Jefferson in his second year? Any kind of regression? And how do you feel? How did you fit him into that seventh spot?
Yeah, so he was a fantastic rookie, arguably the rookie MVP for the NFL in the 2020 season. However, he did not win that award despite a spectacular season. So I do expect a slight regression just because of how good of a year it is. I say the same thing for any position. If a guy has an MVP caliber season for their respective positions, expect a little bit of dip the following year. So Jefferson finished sixth out of those wide receivers in 2020 in points per game. Let me see. And AJ Brown actually did slightly better on a per game basis, but Jefferson was able to play all 16 and AJ Brown only played 14. So I'm moving them, just swapping them basically from last year, and I still expect great things for Jefferson.
Yeah, now you can't go wrong with either one. So we're not going to spend a ton of time on this tier. I did want to ask you about Michael Thomas though, and give me your thoughts. A lot happening there. How confident do you feel in your ranking at putting him at number 12? And is there any chance that he could drop on your list, despite just being such a fantasy consistent stud through the years? First receiver take in many cases. Give us what you got on Michael Thomas.
Yeah, so man, he started out his career with a bang and was solid for a number of years in a row until really the last 2 years, especially 2020 with all the injuries he dealt with. And unfortunately, that's some of the same currently. So it looks like he's going to miss some time. And I would expect his average draft value to be below that 12th receiver spot, where he is on my rankings, depending on when he gets back and the sheer amount of volume he's going to get in that Saints offense, especially if Taysom Hill wins that job. I mean, not Taysom Hill, excuse me. If Jameis Winston wins the job, which would probably boost Thomas's value more than if Taysom Hill was the quarterback.
I agree, and I think a healthy Michael Thomas still does have a good floor. In this draft where you can move guys up and down the board, I'm not sure I'll end up with Michael Thomas in this draft unless he's just sitting pretty for me there. But they kind of bust on him and call him the slant route king, like that's all he can do. Well, I tell you what, Taysom Hill can throw those slant routes, Jake. I mean, it's right up his
Yep.
alley. So a guy like Michael Thomas, other than like say your deep receivers or guys that run routes that really concentrate on timing. Michael Thomas's routes are pretty simple, clear cut. He gets open, he knows how to work it, and he can be a friendly target even if Taysom Hill is the quarterback there. The last
Certainly.
the last guy from your list, sorry to cut you off there, but it's just a lot of receivers, so I'm a little hyped up here on this show. Brandon Cooks, number 17. Now this is the one where, as least confident as I am in myself, that I would say, Jake, wait a minute, buddy. We got a lot of other receivers here. Brandon Cooks in a new situation once again. How do you feel about Brandon Cooks? Why is he that high? I'm going to say, why is he that high on your list?
So Brandon Cooks has been incredibly consistent throughout his career with he's actually had some pretty good quarterback play when you think about it. Playing with Drew Brees and the Saints, playing with Deshaun Watson, also playing in New England for a couple years with Tom Brady. So he has had good quarterback play. However, he is constantly slept on. He's a guy that racks up 1,000 yards year after year. And last year, he was one of the most consistent route runners out there, and just a guy, averaging. Let's see, Cooks is in a tier with guys like Adam Thielen, Mike Evans, AJ Brown, Robert Woods, Amari Cooper. I mean, he was averaging 16.3 points per game last year, which is just phenomenal. So I do expect those numbers to drop a little bit this year with the quarterback situation in Houston. However, the guy is consistent, and he's going to be a target hog in Houston. Regardless of quarterback, he's getting volume. We're half point PPR. If you're in PPR, he's still going to be really valuable. He does know how to, catch the ball, and that's going to be critical when we're talking about fantasy football these days.
Yeah, and an increased target load is going to help any kind of receiver. And, Brandon Cooks has never been a touchdown machine. So maybe if you're playing in the standard league, you kind of bump him down your list a little bit. But for the sake of this show and a half point PPR, I still have a little bit of problem with where you rank him, but I definitely understand. Like, I think my thing is, Jake, that Brandon Cooks is like, he is who he is. I can't see him getting 120 targets or something crazy. Could be wrong.
I
Who the heck
Yeah, I
knows?
I really disagree with that. In their offense right now, he could be looking at 150 targets.
There you go, guys. There you
Personally,
go.
yeah.
So, yeah, if you want to comment below on that or on Twitter or anywhere, I would like to hear what you guys think. If you're with me or with Jake on the Brandon Cooks pick, definitely an interesting player. So, Jake, here we go now. We're going to show wide receivers 19 through 32 up on the screen. And the first guy I want to ask you about is a rookie from last year, San Francisco 49ers player, Brandon
Hmm.
Ayuk, a guy I liked coming out of college for a couple of reasons. His yak, I think, is just really, really good, and it's kind of like it's just it's just consistent yak, and he is fast, he is quick, he takes good angles, he has good vision with the ball in his hands. I guess the big questions for fans out there would be what's going on with the quarterback situation. But can
Hmm.
you please just go over your expectations for Brandon Ayuk this season?
Yeah. So in my research, he was an absolute outlier guy in this tier. He averaged 16.3 points per game, which is another great number. The problem was his health. Played in 12 games. So I think he will be healthier this year. Some of that stuff you can't predict. But with those great numbers and him most likely becoming more involved in the offense, regardless of Garoppolo or Lance, this guy could be pretty special in a Shanahan offense where they view him more as the X receiver and Debo Samuel more as a weapon that they throw out, kind of in a Z slot most of the time.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about Samuel and how those two work together. So basically, I see a lot of the similarities in their game as far as they're yak guys. So you don't need to ask them to run. Not that they can't, but you don't need them to run a plethora of routes for them to be effective. So you definitely see Ayuk as a higher upside. Is that maybe why you have him higher than Samuel on your list?
Yeah, for sure. I really do like both players a lot. Especially during the draft with Debo Samuel, I was very high on him. I'm not a Gamecocks fan by any means. I'm a Georgia fan, but I appreciate talent when I see it, and he certainly has it. He's one of those ball in hand kind of guys. I just think Ayuk um, might get a little bit more high upside play out of a guy like Trey Lance or Jimmy G.
Yeah, I feel comfortable with either one because I think that, like I said, the routes that they've run are going to be primed. Brandon Ayuk, good rookie season, healthier hopefully this season, and he should put up points on your fantasy team. He'll be every week starter, I think, either wide receiver two or flex. And we talked about a young guy. I want to go to somebody that's been in the league for a while, And how quickly time passes for Odell Beckham Jr. What a career! Just an interesting player all the way around. People seem to either love him or hate him. But when you look at this Browns team, it should be a very good offense. They have a great offensive line, which is where it all starts. Baker Mayfield with Kevin Stefanski's system, perfect match. You really got to see the best of Baker. And I think Baker will be very good. As long as Stefanski is there, we're going to see the same type of production from Baker Mayfield. Pretty confident in that. And even as a Ravens fan, I'm not ashamed to say it. I think that's a great match. But Odell himself, health problems. Even when he was in there, that first game against the Ravens, granted, Ravens have a great secondary. We were able to get in Odell's head a little bit and lock him down. You have Odell
Yes,
Beckham
sir.
Jr. at 27. Go ahead, take it away on Odell.
Yeah, so he is obviously still a really talented player. Amazing ball skills. This guy knows how to catch the football, acrobatic catches. He practices in that style all the time. You can see it pregame. You can see it whenever the Browns show practice clips. So um, that's not really an issue. Constant drops seem to happen at times for him where he will catch the spectacular pass, but not always the the sure thing. So I'd be right about in this range. He could climb a little bit just because of how talented of a player he is. I think he will gel a little bit better in this offense with another year under Stefanski, and he won't be as much of a liability, if you want to call it that, where he went out of the game and people were saying how the Browns offense kind of clicked more. I think that'll be different this year, and he'll be a very productive player.
Yes, I agree with that. And I think Odell, health is the key, but talent's always going to be there for him. And, with Odell and that Browns team, it's kind of hard to say where the offense is going through other than the wide receivers. And I don't think we're going to know this, Jake, until the season starts. I mean, it's not like Odell's going to be run out there in 3 preseason games and, they're going to wear a tear. He's going to get limited action probably. And whether he lights it up or whether he doesn't catch a pass, it's not going to change his role in the regular season. So go ahead, carefully place Odell on your list. I want to transition to someone you have a few spots lower, someone close to our heart as Ravens fans here, and that's Marquise Hollywood Brown. Now,
Mm.
number 30 on your list, I haven't finalized my list. I have to be completely honest because I keep moving them around. And I really, man, like, I commend you for putting your list out there like this because, man, this is a tough, tough group. But Hollywood Brown at number 30, I want to give my opinion first and have you respond to it. I think that with the additions of Sammy Watkins, when Bateman gets back, James Prochet's comfort level, Duvernay's comfort level, the running backs, a lot of people are taking all that and they're saying, well, Hollywood could have a reduced role. Man, his numbers might go down. Lamar's got all these weapons. They're a running team anyway. I actually disagree with that. And as somebody that follows the Ravens, I feel pretty strongly about that. The reason is the connection between Lamar and Hollywood has been there from the start. Jake, we get to see him all the time down in Florida working out. Hollywood has a defined role on this team. He's a little banged up now, but that hasn't stopped him before, Jake. Like, Hollywood Brown plays through pain, he plays through minor injuries. When it's go time for Hollywood Brown. And I expect him to be very good again this year, the same type of year. As a matter of fact, I think that he could finally creep up to and eclipse that 1,000 yard mark. And then the other thing people sleep on with Hollywood Brown is his touchdown production. This guy
Mhm.
scores. I mean, for a guy of you don't he's not a tall receiver, big receiver, not a contested catch guy. Those kind of guys, Jake, usually don't score touchdowns. But here's Hollywood putting up touchdowns at a really nice pace. So, would you agree with me that Hollywood's going to have a better year than he did last year? And is there a chance that when you rethink things, that he might be a guy that creeps up a couple of spots?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I am right there with you with everything you said. I just couldn't figure out where to place him above this mark. I did through my research. I put him probably finishing around 25 at the end of this year, which doesn't match 30, but I couldn't figure out exactly how to place him there. So he should be a guy that gives you value in a fantasy draft where he might be wide receiver or probably even further down than that. in leagues that you're not playing with a bunch of Ravens fans, but he is certainly capable of being a top 20 to 25 fantasy wide receiver this season. He should be close to that 1,000-yard number, and you're right, he does produce a decent amount of touchdowns, if not a great amount of touchdowns for a wide receiver his size or just in general.
Yeah, I love those kind of receivers, and this goes back to the argument in your top three with Tyreek Hill compared to a guy like Devonte Adams. I tend to prefer the guys who give me that steady production and don't put up
Mm-hmm.
a 5 or 6 point day and really, you're counting on them that day, and then the next week they go for 25. I mean, the numbers at the end of the year are all the same, but for Hollywood, he's going to be involved in the game plan every week. He's going to get his chunk. There's a role for him, so I like Hollywood Brown a lot. So, hey, we're doing very, very well here. A lot of names to cover, so we're going at a great pace.
Let's do it.
Yeah, man, let's bring up that wide receiver list you see on the screen right now. Receivers 33 through 45. Again, a ton of interesting names, a ton of players that could be wide receiver 2 even by the end of this year. The first guy I want to focus in on is actually the top guy on this list at number 33, and that's Curtis Samuel. Now, Curtis Samuel is a do-it-all player. You saw him as a running back in college. You've seen him as a receiver. He kind of gives you those points no matter where he is. What do you expect his role to be? New role, new team. How do you think this is all going to go?
Man, he was an exciting player in 2020 with the Panthers. Near the midway point to the end of the season, he was one of the more consistent flex options in fantasy football, period. He averaged 15 points per game last year in 15 games. Those numbers might go down a little bit just because he's going to a new team and the situation is a little cloudy. But he has Terry McLaurin. He had two nice receivers ahead of him in Carolina with DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson. So he really only has one guy there, and there's going to be some other options as well. They drafted Diami Brown out of North Carolina, and they also brought in Adam Humphries, who apparently is having a really good connection with Ryan Fitzpatrick as teammates. So his role is a little bit up in the air, but he's a really consistent player, can be moved all over the field, and you have to think that a guy like that is a weapon that is fun to use when you're an offensive coordinator. So I feel like he's pretty appropriate in this spot at 33. You can move him up or down a little bit if you see fit, but that's where I have him right now.
Yes, I agree 100%. I think the word fun that you used is a really good one because they have Antonio Gibson in that offense too. They have J.D. McKissick. They have had players of this. What I'm getting at, players that fit the mold of a Curtis Samuel. And you mentioned what was going on in Carolina through all that he produced. Terry McLaurin is actually going to help Curtis Samuel a lot, and just the running back, the flexibility that they have in the skill sets there. I really like Curtis Samuel, and it wouldn't surprise me if he creeped up a little bit as that season went along. A guy that we know less about. Very controversial, I thought, through the draft for as productive as he was. He ended up landing in Philadelphia. People are concerned about his size. Will he hold up? Well, he's tall. He's very tall, but he's slender. Seems to be flexible and can take the punishment. Been a little banged up in camp, I believe. Maybe you can correct me on that. But that's Devonte Smith. And in Philadelphia, he may be the number one weapon, simply because Jalen Reagor is more of a weapon than he is pure wide receiver at this point, whereas Devonte Smith can run all those routes, especially those comeback routes. Love him on those comeback routes, Jake.
Yeah, I love Devonte Smith as well. And you are right. I think we mentioned it in a previous pod that he has dealt with a little bit of injuries, but we shouldn't necessarily knock him for that. Unfortunately, we recorded that podcast and then Rashad Bateman goes down with injury, which is unfortunate, but he should be back soon. Devonte is a guy you want to grab in dynasty leagues, and I'd even say he's a valuable player in his rookie season in a redraft league. So he could clearly be above 38 in overall wide receiver ranking. It's just questions about his health. if he's going to hold up for the whole season and what that offense really looks like. Jalen Hurts was special last year in limited action with 25 points per game, as we mentioned. But we'll see what happens. That offensive line is still kind of gelling, getting together. The rest of the weapons are not great. So he could be a target hog for sure. I mentioned that term earlier. A guy that sees well over 100 targets in his first year.
For sure, because their two best targets. I mean, Zach Ertz is still in the team as of now, and Dallas Goddard. That's a great tight end group that they have. I think that they'll use the middle of the field as well. Devonte Smith is a guy you can move around. But if I'm looking at those, like I tell you, if Flacco is the quarterback there, and we've seen him with his arm strength just dot the outside on comeback routes. Think of Derek Mason. Think of Steve Smith. Think of even Anquan Bolden, who was a different kind of outside receiver. But Devonte Smith just has such a great feel for space, for where he is to come back, to reach out, snag the ball with his hands. I could see his value shooting up. If Jalen Hurts were to start struggling, maybe Devonte Smith is a guy that I trade for because I think that he'll just get better and better as the season goes along. Another guy, I think that I just like the guy himself. Colorful personality, love his hair. I know that he won't see this show, but Robbie Anderson, if you're out there, love you, love everything about your style. But Robbie Anderson, now he went from the New York Jets with Sam Darnold. Now he's in Carolina with Sam Darnold. That kind of continuity. Now I spoke many times on the show about the unknown and the fear of the unknown that I have when it comes to drafting in fantasy. How do you expect Robbie Anderson to connect with Sam Darnold again down there in Carolina?
Yeah, I think his connection should be pretty strong right away, considering he was kind of Sam's go-to guy when they were with the Jets together. DJ Moore should still be considered wide receiver one on that team, but Anderson was a very nice fantasy play last year. I definitely would still recommend, if you're in this range, maybe you target running backs early and you get those guys that are going to catch a lot of passes out of the backfield, and you kind of load up your team, the more traditional way of going after backs. Anderson is a great wide receiver to grab to be your wide receiver 2 or a flex play. He is kind of in that fringe wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3/flex. So he should be very solid. We'll see what Sam Darnold can do in Carolina with Joe Brady, but I think things are still looking good for Robbie.
And I think you bring up a really good point there, not just on Robbie Anderson, but just the wide receiver group as a whole. I think we need to take time and just talk about this for a second, Jake. I mean, we're showing on the screen, these are wide receivers 33 through 45. So some of these guys that you have at 45, they won't even be on others' list, or they'll be way down the list. This is a good year for me, I think, after looking at everybody, to grab your tight end early, to get your quarterback, make sure you get a quarterback that you love, and to load up on those running backs. We had 22 running backs in your first 3 tiers there. Make sure you get 3 of those guys, and then just save the wide receivers, because Jake, I feel like everybody's list is going to be so different that you're going to get a guy in the X round that you would have picked 3 rounds earlier, but he just slipped through the cracks. There's going to be plenty of those guys. Would you agree on that? And then compared to that also, how much value is it to grab one of those top, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8 guys, the guys you have in your first 2 tiers there?
Yeah, so I would agree with what you're saying. However, there is a ton of value in those top 2 tiers. Those guys are scoring more points than about anyone in fantasy football, apart from the good quarterbacks. So I would look at them. I would look at the top end of running backs, and you want to score the most amount of points as you can. So if running backs are going off early and there is a drop, like a dip in production, get one of those, high caliber wide receivers that is going to look really attractive on your team. You can use them as trade bait later, or you can keep them and just start them week after week. Yeah, definitely those top two are great value. Well, not necessarily great values, but great players to target early. And then tier 3 and tier 4 are close to interchangeable, especially as you get to the bottom of tier 3 into the top of tier 4 in wide receivers.
Okay, and again, as we said, you have to feel out the draft, see where everything is. Every draft is different, but yeah, I kind of like that, Jake. Get yourself a good wide receiver early, and then just kind of let them fall to you. Let them fall to you from there. Do not press. Do not overdraft a wide receiver. I would suggest in this draft by any means because there's going to be a good one right around the corner. And we see Jake. Maybe this is just the evolution of the game, but these wide receivers are coming in more and more pro ready. These college receivers. It used to be that it took them a couple of years before you really they started to pay off. But I'm in the one keeper league I'm in. I'm seeing these rookies go early, and already the year after they're just stellar values. Like Justin Jefferson was like a seventh
Wow.
round
Yeah.
pick or something like that last year. And I'm like seventh round. That seems kind of high for a rookie. Well, shoot, that guy's going to get him in the sixth round this year. Great deal. So if you're in any kind of keeper dynasty leagues, look at these rookies and look at them. Look at them critically. Look at them hard, and make sure you take a chance on one. Just my personal opinion. Obviously, every draft goes along, but do you see that falling off anytime soon, Jake, or do you think the receivers are just going to come in hitting the ground running?
I think it's going to continue. It really is a lot of fun to see, especially as I enjoy scouting college football. Wide receivers are one of the easier positions to get into right away, so that's one I'm very fond of, and I really like digging into those, especially as a Ravens fan, as you know, uh, practically looking for them every year. And this upcoming season might be the first one where I kind of dial back the receiver watch.
Well, let's hope
But
so. Let's hope so.
yeah. But absolutely, they are coming in pro ready for the most part and producing early on. So they are becoming the new running back in terms of draft value. I think less and less first round wide receivers are going to they're going to go away a little bit. The value is not going to be there quite as much for a lot of teams, and because you can find these guys in the second round, third round that produce at the NFL level.
Yes, and if you're in a redraft league, even I suggest to get yourself at least one rookie running back and one rookie wide receiver. And the
Yep.
reason is because people don't know them as well as you do. If you see them in college and you're like, yeah, this guy's going to the right place, it's going to translate. That's a guy I usually get. I remember the one year I had Adrian Peterson and Arian Foster. I got Arian Foster
Mm,
like late. Ended up having
undrafted, right?
Dude, yeah, dude, yes, undrafted, but he went to that zone. I mean, I was just with the Kubiak scheme. I was like, oh man, this is, dude, I'm getting him. So just to brag on my team, I also had Tom Brady and Calvin Johnson that year. I think I went like, I think I lost 2 games. I think that was it. So yeah, that was my glorious days, my best teams. I think because in Yahoo they keep the records of how many points are scored. I think that team's still like way up there at the top. So but
Wow.
had to pause there and ask you about that, about the rookie and the young receivers. I'm going to turn it back over to you now. Apologize for speaking so much. We're going to put up wide receivers 46 through 55 on your screen. And the first guy I want to ask you about is Russell Gage at 48. Now, Russell Gage is going to have the opportunities there in Atlanta with Julio Jones gone. Russell Gage
Certainly.
has also operated. He's been an Atlanta Falcon for a while. They have a new offensive coordinator, of course, head coach, and Arthur Smith. Call him coordinator, but same thing. It's going to be Arthur Smith's offense. But Gage, as a player, as far as like the talent, doesn't ooze these like traits and skills. So, what do you expect from Russell Gage? Do you have any kind of, and maybe I'll put you on the spot here, like how many catches, how many yards, if you can't predict the touchdowns, like what do you expect from Russell Gage out there in Atlanta?
Yeah, it's tough to say. I didn't really think about the catches and yards for Gage, but off the top of my head, I would say somewhere between 65 and 75 catches for right around 1,000 yards. I think he might be a little bit under that because they did draft Kyle Pitts, who is practically an X wide receiver Really talented player that we'll get to when we talk about tight ends. So he will definitely be a key part of that offense, and you could get great value by drafting him around this slot. 48th wide receiver. He could really boom for you. I don't think he's going to bust much based on the ADP for this player.
Yes, and for that reason, I think that he will be on he will be drafted in most leagues with a reasonable amount of roster spots. Some leagues have fewer than others, but I think in most drafts you'll see Russell Gage go because the opportunity is there, and then he has proven that he's a pretty steady player. So getting back to the list though, this is where the opinions are we're gonna have guys who pretty soon won't be drafted, but guys who will be drafted in some leagues, won't be drafted in others. But they all have something to offer as far as upside. Uh, and the next guy on this list at number 50, Nicole Hardman. Now, we talked earlier, actually, you and I did, and I actually spoke with at ZZ Godspeed about this, where he's trying to take Sammy Watkins' old role, not just coming in as a speed guy or as a third, fourth receiver, maybe an expanded role for an explosive player like Nicole Hardman. Uh, Georgia guy, right? So you've seen him up
Absolutely.
close.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, sir. Go Dogs.
go Dogs. There you go. I don't root for Georgia, but I'll say that for Jake right here. Um, Give me your scouting report on the speedy McCole Hardman and how you expect him to fit into the Kansas City explosive offense that they have.
Yeah, so I loved Nicole Hardman in the same draft as Hollywood Brown. The Ravens got Hollywood in the first round, so I figured McCole is long gone. We're not gonna take him later. But I would have been very, very happy with him. His career thus far hasn't been that impressive, but he's a really talented guy. He's dealt with a little bit of injuries and has been a bit buried under the rest of that depth chart. Now he's coming into a role where he's the number 2 wide receiver. The two guys ahead of him in targets are obviously Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill, and they are fantasy football studs and real life NFL stars. So Hardman is bound to get an increase in targets this year. Last year he averaged 8.04 points per game. I expect that number to climb probably around 14 points per game. So that's a pretty significant jump of about 6 points. So he should be a very solid flex play if you can grab him this late. I would kind of wait into the early weeks of the season to see how he's playing, depending on your depth already on your fantasy squad to insert him into your lineup. But he's a talented guy, and he definitely has explosive speed.
Yeah, and if you're talking upside, if that's something that you're looking for in your later receivers, Hardman would be one of those guys. Like you said, he should be third in targets. It's a pretty easy
Yeah.
estimation, in my opinion. I think Demarcus Robinson does get lost, but he's a good possession receiver. But Hardman, his big play potential, he's not going to put up, in my opinion, 70 catches, 80 catches. That's just probably not going to, like, I don't believe in that part of the hype. But with 50 catches, I could see him pushing 800 yards,
Yeah.
getting 8 to 10 touchdowns and being, especially if you're playing against Mahomes, is a guy that I would just throw into that flex spot and just, try to steal Patrick Mahomes' points away with
Right.
McCole
Yeah.
Hardman play. I'm sure you play those games all the time too. Sometimes, like, how do you play that, Jake? If you have a wide receiver, say you think that this wide receiver is probably going to have a better week, but the other wide receiver you're playing against his quarterback, do you ever go against your gut and play the wide receiver that or do you play the wide receiver whose quarterback you're facing, or do you go with who you think's a better play?
I would normally go with who I think's a better play. If it's close, I might play games like that.
Cool. Yeah, I just thought of that off the top of my head because I feel guilty about that sometimes. I'm like, oh,
I,
you
I
just go ahead.
Yeah, I think for me it'd be more like very matchup specific. If the Ravens are playing the Chiefs, and I think they have a chance of shutting down the top couple options, then I'll get more into it, and I'll be like, McCole Hardman's going to have a game, or like this nobody on the roster is going to score a touchdown. And I'll get into that a little bit, but not too much in regular fantasy. It's more for DFS.
Yeah, and I like a lot of these guys, these second receivers that we're talking about now, when they're up against like a Jalen Ramsey or something like that, where you know that the top receiver is going to have a hard time getting open. And so if Jalen Ramsey's covering the number one receiver on that team, and you got the number two or number three or the tight end or whoever it is, yeah, I like to get to go ahead and play those games too, because sometimes there's more to the story than just the projected points that they like to put up there. Wanted to touch on Jamison Crowder, number 51, another steady Eddie player. Go ahead and give me your scouting report on Crowder, and how do you expect him to keep churning along in his NFL career?
Yeah, so Crowder has been a good player out of the slot for the Jets. He's a trick pony in terms of what he does on the field. I do expect his role to decrease a little bit because they've added so many weapons. He's no longer the number one guy with the Jets, which is kind of funny for a slot only type player. He was kind of the Julian Edelman of the New York Jets, also in that same division in the AFC. But at this point, he is kind of wide receiver 3 there, maybe wide receiver 4. They have Corey Davis. They just drafted Elijah Moore, who is getting rave reviews. A.J. Brown posted either today or yesterday that he would put his game checks on Elijah getting the rookie wide receiver award or the rookie MVP. So that's pretty high praise for his former teammate at Ole Miss. But yeah, there's plenty of weapons in New York versus what it has been recently. So I expect him to drop a little bit, but he has been a consistent player. Let's see what his points per game, if I can find it.
Yeah, surprisingly consistent though, because especially with just he hasn't been in the best situations to produce the way he has.
Absolutely. So I just found it. He averaged 15.2 points per game last year in 12 games. So you have to be aware that he could miss a little bit of time if it's anything like last year, but he was very consistent with gaining those targets and yards.
Okay, moving on. Another guy I really wanted to talk about is number 55 on your list, and that's Henry Ruggs. Now, Ruggs drafted, I believe, 10th overall. It was pretty high. He was the first receiver taken in the draft last year. He was taken over guys like C.D. Lamb, over guys like Jerry Jeudy, over Justin Jefferson. The Raiders like their speed. I think, honestly, they said, oh, yeah, you guys got Tyreek Hill. We're going to get our Tyreek Hill, and his name is Henry Ruggs. But easier said than done there, Jake.
Yep.
You have Brian Edwards there, who I believe has the potential to be a really good possession receiver. Love his skills. You probably saw him out there in the SEC.
Yep.
Different. You have your Willie Snead, you have your Kenyon Drake, you have your Josh Jacobs, and of course the number one weapon is Darren Waller. So how does Henry Ruggs fit in here? How confident do you feel that he could break out and like bust up this list, or is he just a guy that you're going to take a late flyer on?
I think his ADP is going to be a little bit higher than where I have him for sure. 55 seems kind of low for a guy with his talent. However, I don't see him much higher than wide receiver 25. That obviously is a huge jump from 55. We were talking about Hollywood Brown jumping from 30 to 25. So from Ruggs being at 55 on my list, that's quite steep. He is a really talented player, extremely fast. He put on some weight this offseason in order to deal with the contact that he gets in press coverage in the game of football. So he put on the weight to deal with more contact. This year, I expect bigger things and better things for Henry Ruggs. He is going to definitely receive some more of those passes he gets thrown his way, and hopefully he can deal with that contact. He should be number 2 to 3 on the team when it comes to targets. You have Darren Waller. And then you have the running backs, like you mentioned, Jacobs and Kenyon Drake. So Ruggs is right there with that high pedigree, a guy I loved at Alabama. He just hasn't put it together yet, and this could be the year.
Yeah, I love. I think something that goes under the radar with Henry Ruggs is his physical nature, and you mentioned him putting on weight. But this is a guy. He's not prancing out of bounds. He's a force. He almost reminds me of like a Devin Duvernay on the Ravens, where he is. His calling card is his speed, but man, it's force equals mass times acceleration. This guy is he's a handful to tackle. So I could see Henry Ruggs bouncing up, but it's one of those things for me at least where I don't have a problem at all with where you have him ranked because I have to see it to believe it. And I didn't think Henry Ruggs was a route runner. Thought it would take him some time. If he ever learns how to run a comeback, his stops, his cuts, just the technicalities of running a wide receiver, he can become one of the best in this league. But personally, I want to see it just to believe it. Okay, and moving on. Uh, Next tier of receivers, we have numbers 56 through 66. Interesting guys on this list, like Henry Ruggs, a lot of unknown, but a lot of upside. The first guy we're going to talk about is somebody that I think that I'm going to draft this year. I think that I have big expectations for him in his rookie season out of Miami. I love the way that Tua and Waddle can work because they have a history together. Tua loves those short timing passes. Jalen Waddle gets open quickly, whereas a receiver like Devontae Parker, I might question the quarterback situation. I love the Tua to Waddle possibilities here. Number 57 seems a little bit low to me, but I mean, again, we're talking about a ton of talent here at wide receiver. How do you see Waddle fitting in? Is there anything you can push back on my argument about how much I like him? Like, what would cause you to not draft him or to like other people ahead of him in a similar tier?
Yeah, so I really do like Jalen Waddle a ton, especially just as a football player in general. I loved Henry Ruggs coming into the draft. I love Jalen Waddle even more. So it's this is not indicative of where I view him as a player. This is more the role and situation in Miami. I do believe that Devontae Parker is the number one receiver in Miami still. They brought in Will Fuller, who's a really good player. I don't know if we're going to touch on him in a little bit, but
Go ahead,
he
just
at
go ahead,
yeah
just
yeah
talk about both. Yeah.
he averaged 17.2 points last year in 11 games, and that number is well above the tier that he's in. But he just was out, I think, for some PEDs and maybe a little bit of health issue, which seems to be a common theme with him. But still a really talented player, a field stretcher. We'll see what Tua can do with that in his second season. And Jalen Waddle is a similar player in terms of speed. I mean, he's got to be one of the fastest guys in the league. Period. And you were right about some of the timing routes, some of the shallow crossers that he can be successful underneath with Tua. I'm just not sure about the volume that he's going to get in year one, which is why he's as low as he is. He could prove me wrong right away. It could be week one, week two, week three. You're getting a sample size, and he is just like, he's catching 5 passes a game, and then I'm way off. And this guy is, a top 30 wide receiver in his rookie season because he definitely has the talent to be. I'm just not sure with the other guys that are kind of ahead of him in the pecking order where he'll end up this year.
That's why I've gotten so much out of this out of these discussions already, Jake, because what you're making is making perfect. What you're saying is making perfect sense to me, and because like my viewpoint is like I feel like he'll be targeted like a slot receiver, who are usually the most targeted on your team. All things, if you look at the stats, your slot receivers, your slot corners, they face the most targets,
Sure.
highest completion percentage, which makes sense the closer you get into the line of scrimmage. But yeah, that is kind of you think about Miles Gaskin too in their run game, their good defense. Devontae Parker, Will Fuller. That is a sneaky talented offense in Miami.
Mike Gesicki that we'll get to.
Mike Gesicki, yeah, another good player, goal line threat. So how Waddle fits in on that, man, I think, like I said, I think I view him a little bit higher than others, just because I like the fit. What about over in Chicago? We don't get a lot of, Allen Robinson out there is a stud, but when you think Chicago Bears, you think defense, you think quarterbacks coming in. Jay Cutler stabilized the situation from a fantasy perspective out there for a little bit. But Darnell Mooney, a lot of talent, was drafted late.
Mm-hmm.
What can you say about his situation, and what are your expectations for Darnell?
Yeah, he was a really cool player out of Tulane last year in the 2020 draft, and he came in and proved that he belonged in the league right away. This guy can run crisp routes for being more of a speed threat, and he was open a lot more than he got accurate targets last year. That has been well documented on NFL.com, on NFL Network, period. Just watching the games, watching the all 22, you can see this guy gets open and he can create some separation. So he is an exciting player in year two. I think he takes a big leap with either quarterback, to be honest, but especially when you're talking about the Bears drafting Justin Fields. He was a guy that liked throwing the ball to two targets, especially in that Ohio State offense. He had Chris Olave and he had Garrett Wilson, who are both, first round caliber wide receivers. And the way Mooney can be used underneath as well as a deep threat in the Bears offense is pretty enticing. So at 60, you're getting great value for a player that can win a bunch of matchups if the quarterback play is better than what it has been.
I love it. I love it. I mean, you can make a case for so many of these guys that the more we talk here, and I'm just thinking out loud, I feel like I'm going to get myself four really good running backs and then just load up on wide receivers, however many I can afford to have on the roster spot. Because if not just for your production, you're talking about trade bait. You may be in a league, a keeper league, or something like that, a dynasty league, whatever it may be. But yeah, Darnell Mooney, another intriguing guy. And we talked about Elijah Moore a little bit earlier. But can you give me some? Maybe you have. You don't have to get too specific. But what kind of season do you expect Elijah Moore to have?
Yeah, so he was an impressive player and used all over the field, definitely a slot weapon. Like we talked about earlier, slot receivers can often be the guys getting the most targets on the team. So that bodes well for him, even in his rookie year, especially with him being a rookie. He's getting that early chemistry with Zach Wilson, the new quarterback for the Jets. They have practiced outside of the team together, and it seems like things are going really well for him. So I would expect, about 100 targets, maybe more than that for Elijah Moore, even though he's not the number one wide receiver on the team as of yet. Moore is an exciting player. And when players like A.J. Brown and I'm sure DK Metcalf vouch for you, that kind of says a lot. Those are really talented wide receivers in the game. And I think Moore could well surpass that his draft spot in my rankings.
Would you say he's going to bet his game check on Rookie of the Year? Who was it? Was Metcalf said
Yeah,
that?
AJ Brown said
AJ
that.
Brown. I should have known. Yeah, AJ.
Yeah,
He can talk a little bit for sure.
yeah.
So Jake, thank you so much for this discussion. And like I always like to do at the end, I'm going to put your lists up there. I'm going to put them up into tiers, as many as I can fit on the screen, as you can see right there. Can you give me your final thoughts on the receiver position, or if it's anybody in particular, or a couple of guys, or an offense you want to focus on? Go ahead and give me a couple of minutes and close this thing out for me.
Sure. So this is a really deep group. If I know we're not really talking about dynasty here, but I like to bring it up. if you are in dynasty leagues, make sure to get rookie wide receivers. They produce at an amazing rate, and it's oftentimes not the first guys drafted. If you look back at last year, Justin Jefferson was an absolute stud. Same thing could happen this year for perhaps Rashad Bateman, wink, wink, or a number of guys. Elijah Moore is definitely pushing that envelope. We already touched on the Alabama product that's with the Eagles, Devonte Smith, and so many more. Jalen Waddle, and then guys that get further down. Josh Palmer could be a really exciting player in the future with the Chargers. They have Justin Herbert, a quarterback that loves to throw the rock. He absolutely loves to. Mike Williams is likely not going to be there after this season unless they pony up and pay him after his fifth-year contract, which is happening in 2021. So there are tons of guys to look at. Make sure to attack those early tiers, and then, pick the guys that you like, the situations you like in those tier 3, tier 4 groups. You should be pretty happy with the depth at the receiver position this year.
I love it. Absolutely love it. And I think that you changed my mind on the waiting on receivers, the zero receiver philosophy. Yeah, go ahead and get one of those horses up front, and then that can allow you to really take some chances in the back end of this draft. And last note on Josh Palmer, he was one of my favorites for as far as a value pick in this draft. Man, it was the Senior Bowl for me, Jake. Like, I value the
Yeah.
Senior Bowl a lot, and I learned that through being a Ravens fan, how much they value it. But when everybody gets off a plane in a strange place, everybody's got access to the same drills, the same playbook. You can really kind of separate the men from the boys in that kind of situation, to use an old phrase, because they're all starting on a level playing field, like the combine. Like, hey, we're going to put you all through the same rough process, throw you all into the fire. And when I saw Josh Palmer, he reminds me of like just like a wild stallion or something, man. Like,
Mm-hmm.
he's like got that power, but it's like long strides, and I could definitely see him taking over for Mike Williams in that role. Mike Williams has been beat up, contract expiring. I think that he might have he's going to have to take a discount probably to stay out there with the Chargers, and I could see the Chargers just saying, "Well, hey, we got Josh Palmer. We see what he's doing in practice." So another intriguing guy that if he splashes on the scene in the first couple of weeks, you might want to go ahead and put a bid in on a guy like Josh Palmer, who we didn't even get to until the last 5 minutes of the show or whatever it is. So, Jake, thank you so much. Once again, at Real Jake Vogel. Follow him on Twitter. We'll be back. We'll have the tight end. We'll go over a couple of defenses. And those will be shorter shows, but this was really the one to dig into. And, Jake, thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. I appreciate it.
Football is family. Have a good night, guys.